What I wanted to talk about is the Pope Francis, our Holy Father, and he says a lot of horrible cringe stuff, and every time he says something cringe, it's on the news everywhere, and all of these people, mostly Protestants and other anti-Catholic people, are using it to say, oh, the Catholic Church sucks, and this is why you can't be Catholic, it's promoting global homo, and blah, blah, blah. All the common nonsense arguments that I'll refute in a second, but every time this happens, it makes me realize how much easier and better life must have been as a peasant in the 1100s, where you just had no idea about anything going on with the Pope or anything like that. You were just on your farm, tending to your land and your crops and taking care of your family and just going to church and listening to what the priest said, and that was it. Now it's we're so oversaturated with information that every little thing that the Pope says or something that happens in the Vatican or some cringe priest says is just pushed all over the news, and it's used to perpetuate anti-Catholic bias. And also, don't get me wrong, a lot of times when the Pope says something and it's reported, it's either a mistranslation or the people who are reporting it are taking things that he says out of context in order to promote their own agenda or whatever. But that being said, the Pope does say a lot of horrible, cringe things and ambiguous things, which I'll get to more in a later, which is the really bad thing about him. But regardless, people are using these things that the Pope says or that priests say or whatever as a reason to be against Catholicism. And they like to throw in papal infallibility in Catholic spaces, saying oh, how could you believe in the Pope when he says all this stupid stuff? How do you believe in papal infallibility? What do you think, he's right about everything, blah, blah, blah. And it just comes from either bad faith actors who are just trying to use anything to make Catholics look bad or to push people away from Catholicism, or it's from people who, most people, including some Catholics, who just have a total misunderstanding of what papal infallibility is, how the Catholic Church works. So I'm going to try to show you how you cope with the Pope, how you do some co-poping. The fundamental misunderstanding seems to come from what papal infallibility is. People think that no matter what the Pope says, that means that it can't be wrong. He's completely infallible no matter what he says, and that is not what papal infallibility is whatsoever. First of all, the point of papal infallibility was that the Pope cannot lead the church or bind the church to any error regarding dogma. That was the point of defining papal infallibility in the First Vatican Council, was to say that God would never allow the dogma of the Catholic Church to ever be in error. Second of all, three things need to happen in order for papal infallibility to be invoked. Firstly, the Pope needs to be speaking ex cathedra, meaning he's speaking from the See of Peter. Two, he needs to be speaking authoritatively on a matter of faith and morals. And three, he needs to be speaking with the intention of binding what he's saying to the entire church. That's the criteria for papal infallibility to be invoked. What that means is that when the Pope says anything as an individual or gives any type of political statement or personal opinion on anything, that is not infallible. That can be criticized, that can be disagreed with. We are under no requirement as Catholics to agree with every personal opinion that the Pope has. Popes are still men. They're still capable of sin, and they could be poor personal theologians, they could have horrible opinions, they could be incorrect on everything. Papal infallibility just means that it's never going to bind an incorrect dogma to the Catholic Church as a whole. And people will say oh, well, he's the Pope, he's supposed to be holy and he's supposed to stick to the Catholic faith and blah, blah. Of course, that's what we would hope. That would be awesome if the Pope was, actually trying to maintain tradition and support traditionalists and, not say ambiguous or cringe things. But saying that he can't because he's the Pope is actually part of the Donatist heresy. Part of the Donatist heresy was that bishops, and the Pope is the bishop of bishops, right? That bishops can't be apostates or say anything that is wrong or incorrect or go against the traditions of the Catholic faith or anything like that. And if they did that, if they said anything, then they would no longer be bishops. They would become heretics or whatever, and therefore their ordination as bishops would then be invalid. That was part of the Donatist heresy, and that was stomped out. That was determined that no, that's not true. The bishops are still men. They still can sin, they still can make mistakes, they still can be evil people, but that doesn't negate the fact that they still are bishops. And what's real quick, not to bash Orthodox too bad, is that I see a lot of Orthodox people use this type of argument against the Pope, but then at the same time, they'll criticize Bartholomew for him trying to, like, I guess they accuse him of ecumenism and stuff, but they basically criticize us for having a pope that we may disagree with on certain things, but then they lob the same critiques at Bartholomew. But the point is, when the Pope or any priest or bishop is shilling stupid things like climate change or the vaccine or anything like that, that does not mean that we are like obligated to agree with them or to go through with things that they tell us that we should go through with if it's going against our moral consciousness following traditional Catholicism. Catholicism is true and infallible. The Bible and the Magisterium, those are infallible, but men are still fallible. The only time, like I said, that papal infallibility is a thing is when it meets those three criteria that I just mentioned. Saint Chrysostom said that the roads of hell are paved with the skulls of bishops, meaning that bishops still go to hell. Bishops are still sinners, and you would expect them to be more holy and more knowledgeable and correct, being that they have the vocation of holy orders, but that's not necessarily the case. The actions of bad popes and bad priests, bad clergy, does not negate the truth of Catholicism. And this guy in my Catholic Telegram group chat, Frederick, who has been called my Catholic consigliere, he basically said that being against the papacy because of bad popes is equivalent to being against fatherhood because of bad fathers. But why would God allow a bad pope to be pope? That's obviously a mystery to us. I mean, we could speculate. I think it's because every time there's been bad popes, and there's been a lot of bad popes, every time there's been a bad pope, usually afterwards there comes a time of restoration and a reinvigoration of faith. And people think that Pope Francis is like the worst pope ever. And I mean, I would say that he might be one of the worst popes ever, but it's not because of any like actual sins that he's committing, I guess you could say. Or I mean, I guess you could argue that he does commit sins by what he does, but I mean, in terms of like actual like horrible things that individuals have done that were popes, like we've had popes that were murderers, that were adulterers, we had popes that committed incest, we had a pope that dug up the previous pope and put his corpse on a mock trial. So we've had like really messed up popes. We had a pope, I think, that was like strangled to death because a guy caught him sleeping with his wife or something. So acting like, oh, Pope Francis is the first bad pope, no, it's just not the case. He's not doing anything horrible like that. But in my opinion, the problem with Pope Francis is that every time he gives a statement, they are worded so ambiguously that it's open for interpretation from all sides of the spectrum. Every time he says something, you'll have like the people that want to make Catholicism more liberal, like the people who follow James Martin and stuff. You'll have them interpreted as meaning, oh, see, this is why we should accept gays in the church, or whatever the case is. And then you have like the rad trad saying he's a heretic and we can't listen to the Pope on this or whatever. And then you have like the nuanced bro Catholics who will be like, well, we could actually interpret it to conform with orthodoxy and blah, blah, blah. And it's like, this is the problem right here. He shouldn't be speaking ambiguously. He should be giving definitive statements. And when you speak ambiguously like that, you leave interpretations open to individual subjectivism, which leads people into error and into damnation, which is almost worse than him being just a straight up blatant formal heretic where he's saying things against Catholic dogma, because then we could be like, okay, well, no, this is just clear heresy or something. But instead he's like tactically choosing his words wisely as to not go into heresy, but also to leave enough room for interpretation for anybody to think about what he says for their own personal agenda. And the same thing with the documents of Vatican II. In a similar sentiment, people can, interpret Vatican II statements liberally, which unfortunately has been the case most of the time. But we're told how we're supposed to interpret the documents, because we have the other councils before that we're supposed to look at it through the lens of orthodoxy and traditionalism. But you can't really say that when it's an individual speaking who is supposed to be guiding us. With Vatican II, you could say, okay, well, it's because the way people were interpreting it is wrong, and they were in charge of implementing these things, and it just went out of hand or whatever. But when it's an individual pope speaking, he should be the one clarifying these things, not adding to the ambiguity of things. Now, all of this being said, you still need to toe the line a little bit and be very careful, because what we can do is disagree with the Pope's personal statements and political opinions and things like that. And we can say that, like I just said, we don't like his ambiguity, we wish he would do things differently, all that stuff. But what we can't do is things like call him a heretic or say that he's not the true pope or anything like that. Because when you do that, you're bordering on the line of like sedevacantism or basically Protestantism, thinking that you have individual authority to declare who is and isn't the true pope or whatever. Regardless of what your methodology is, whether you want to quote from scripture or previous councils and stuff like that and say, well, he's doing this and based on this, and you think you're like a personal internet theologian or whatever, that's fine, and you might have some valid points, but you do not have the authority to declare something like that. What you have to do is still respect him as the Pope and that he has the office of the papacy, and what we can never do is leave the true church. We can never branch off or try to split off because we don't think it's the true church anymore because of the state that it's currently in. There's a crisis in the church, but we can never just abandon the church. And this is why I think it's so important for Catholics to actually like read the catechism and read the early church fathers and, you know, actually become knowledgeable about your faith so that you can properly defend it and spread it. I'm still very much a layman, and I watch all of these theologians and read all of these things, and every time I read something, it just makes me like more aware of how much I don't know. But then like you talk to other people who claim to be Catholic or whatever, and they just say things that are complete nonsense, and it's like so many people just don't know anything about their own faith sometimes, and it's very disheartening. And I think that's why it's so important that if you're Catholic, you should make it a prerogative to, you know, learn as much as you can about your faith. It should be the most important thing in your life, right? And you should want to spread the faith to other people. But yeah, that's basically all I wanted to talk about. Also, on a side note that has nothing to do with anything I just talked about, Billie Eilish is a disgusting, sloppy freak, and she looks like she smells like damp laundry. And all of her songs sound exactly the same, like she's mumbling her words, and she's just like, I don't understand why people like her. I really don't. But that has nothing to do with anything. But yeah, just wanted to say that. All right, bye.